Today we're going to talk again about international trade, specifically tariffs. We're going to start with your basic supply-demand curve. This is demand increasing, sloping this way. This is supply meeting demand. This is the price, and this is your quantity. Okay. Now, where the two lines intersect is what we call equilibrium. That's the efficient price. That's the efficient quantity. That's where basically everything produced gets consumed. Okay. Let's talk about consumer surplus first. Okay. Consumer surplus is going to be everything above the price line but below the demand line. Kind of works like this. We have a consumer that comes to market with, say, $10 for a given item, finds the item at $5, and therefore enjoys a very nice surplus. You have another consumer here who would spend $9. You have another consumer here who would be willing to spend less, but in each event, up to this point, the consumer realizes surplus. So that's what this triangle represents, consumer surplus. Okay? How about the producer? Well, the producer's surplus is going to be everything above the supply line and below the price line. So you have a producing firm, let's say, that's willing to sell at $1 and comes to market and finds that they can fetch $5, therefore realizes a very nice surplus. You have another one perhaps, say, here at $2, and you have another one coming up here. So as you can see, while there are producers willing to produce at a profitable price, you get this producer surplus, or PS, right there. Okay, once again, consumer surplus is here, producer surplus is here. Okay, now let's bring in the outside world, because the outside world can produce a whole lot more of said product than can be produced domestically, and they can actually, we find, produce it at a substantially reduced cost for the U.S. consumer. So if we bring in the world supply, let's say that's at $3, okay, then obviously more people will find it affordable, and therefore demand is going to increase substantially. In fact, all the way to here. Okay, and the consequence being tremendously more consumer surplus, right? So that triangle for the consumer is going to expand substantially. Remember, this person had $5, now this person has a surplus of $7 with which to go out and stimulate our economy even more, because at least they say the consumer is 2/3 of the economy. So we're looking pretty good. The bringing in the product from the rest of the world makes great sense for the economy, obviously, great sense for the consumer, but unfortunately not so good for the domestic producer, because where we once had this much domestic quantity, of course that's going to contract, because it's going to take out the producers that were above this particular price line. So the price comes down, we hit domestic quantity substantially, leaving just that much surplus now for the domestic producer. Now we have, again, demand brings us out here, so we have demand way out here that we're going to have to satisfy with imports. That would be your world quantity demand or your world quantity, and the difference between the two would be the amount to which we import. Okay, now in my story, the producing industry, the domestic producing industry, is somewhat politically connected. Okay, and therefore lobbies Washington. Washington agrees, the excuse being all of the lost American jobs in this industry, and applies what we call a tariff or a tax on the imported product, and that brings the price in my example up to $4. Okay, again, here's your equilibrium price once again. Okay, so obviously good news for the domestic producer, okay, because now at a higher price we can bring more domestic production back with jobs, etc. So now we have domestic producer quantity right there, or the quantity right there, and supply moves up, therefore, at least the quantity supplied by domestically moves up, therefore the producer realizes a much nicer surplus for their efforts, or for the efforts of the government. But of course, again, the price line moves vertical, and therefore we're going to take out some of the consumer here. Okay, so we're going to lose some consumer activity there, so we're going to bring the world quantity here, so essentially we just contracted the amount in terms of imports quite dramatically, okay, since that's no longer going on there or there, okay. Well, again, maybe not such a bad thing, because we brought some life back to the domestic industry, and of course we did apply a tariff, and that's going to occupy this rectangle here, and that tariff is going to go to the government, so we're going to call that government revenue, okay. So applied a tariff, brought the price up, which obviously discouraged or created less quantity, created less demand and consequently less quantity. And but again, we did this here. I'm sure that Washington and certainly the domestic industry would call it a success. Obviously, it's not, folks, because obviously all we did was we redistributed consumer surplus and put it in the hands of the government, in the hands of a specific politically favored group. And folks, even those two entities, if you will, receiving that surplus, doesn't quite get it, because there's these triangles here which represents loss in production, loss in consumer surplus. Economists like to call that dead weight loss, and that you can't recover. So folks, at the end of the day, I think that with the 3 videos that we've done on international trade, I'm hoping that I've convinced you that the protectionism is ultimately a very bad thing for the country that is applying it, if you will. And it's not just this. In today's world, it's also the risk of retaliation. As we speak, there's this China currency bill that passed the Senate, that if it were to become law, China has promised, like they did in 2009 when they tariffed U.S. poultry after we tariffed Chinese tires, they'll do that again in a big way. But now, of course, China applying tariffs to imports to their country is every bit as asinine as it is when we do it. Quite frankly, they have the same problem. I could draw the same diagram for them, but they're going to do it. That's just who they are. Folks, inciting a trade war at this time, and you know the state of our current economy, but at any time, is a profoundly bad idea. Thank you very much for watching.